Morning light spilled across the overgrown fields like liquid gold, revealing what most would see as worthless land, tangled weeds, crumbling fences, and forgotten dreams. Sarah stood on the porch of her grandmother's weathered farmhouse, coffee mug warming her hands against the autumn chill. 3 months ago, when the lawyer had read Grandma Eleanor's will, her cousins and uncles had laughed when she refused to sign the sale papers. "That girl's throwing away good money on sentiment," Uncle Robert had muttered. But Sarah saw what they couldn't, potential hiding beneath decades of neglect, whispers of her grandmother's wisdom in every acre. What would they say when they arrived today to see what she'd done with Eleanor's worthless inheritance? Would they finally understand why some legacies can't be measured in dollars? Sarah traced her fingers along the dusty spines of books stacked in Grandma Eleanor's attic. Sunlight filtered through a small window, illuminating dancing dust particles. 3 weeks had passed since she'd stood her ground at the lawyer's office, and the weight of her decision still pressed on her shoulders. "You always were the stubborn one," she whispered to the empty room, imagining Eleanor's approving smile. At 42, Sarah Bennett hadn't expected to abandon her established career as a landscape architect for a corporate firm in Chicago. 15 years designing sterile, trendy gardens for people who barely appreciated them had slowly drained her passion. The promotion she'd been passed over for last spring was just the final nudge. Her hand paused on a leather-bound book. Pulling it free, she brushed away years of dust to reveal elegant handwriting. Garden Dreams, Eleanor Bennett, her grandmother's journal. Sarah settled onto an old trunk, opening the yellowed pages carefully. Inside were meticulous drawings of garden layouts, notes on planting seasons, pressed flowers, and Eleanor's flowing script, documenting decades of growth and change on the land. "Well, I'll be," came a gravelly voice from the attic doorway. Sarah startled, nearly dropping the journal. Hank Willoughby stood there, weathered as the land itself. The neighboring farmer had been Eleanor's friend for over 40 years, and his eyes now crinkled with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Didn't to scare you, Sarah. Saw your car and thought I'd check in. Brought some of Martha's apple pie." "Thanks, Hank. I was just..." She held up the journal. Hank nodded knowingly. "Eleanor's garden Bible. She wrote in that thing every day. Said the land spoke to her, and she was just taking note." Sarah smiled, remembering summer days following her grandmother through rows of vegetables, learning the difference between weeds and seedlings. "I was 10 when she first let me plant something on my own. Sunflowers," Hank said, surprising her. "You planted them all along the eastern fence." Eleanor was so proud she took pictures and showed everyone at church. The memory washed over Sarah, her small hands patting soil over seeds. Eleanor patiently explaining how deep to plant them, the astonishment when those tiny seeds grew taller than her. By August, "The family thinks I'm crazy," Sarah confessed. "Uncle Robert called yesterday, said I'm throwing away good money on sentiment. The developer's offer went up another 50,000. Hank leaned against the doorframe. "Your uncle never understood this place. He saw Eleanor's farm as a burden after your grandfather passed, always looking for the quick dollar. 300 acres. The developer wants to put in a gated community with a golf course." Sarah's voice tightened. "They'd bulldoze everything, and what do you want to do with it?" Sarah looked down at the journal. "I don't know yet, but these fields raised 3 generations of Bennetts. There's something here worth saving." Hank nodded. "Eleanor always said you were the one who'd understand." Sarah glanced up. "What do you mean?" "Come on, I want to show you something before the light fades." They descended from the attic, through the house with its faded wallpaper and creaking floorboards. Outside, Hank led her past the old barn to a rise overlooking the property. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across overgrown fields. To most, it looked like failure, a forgotten farm returning to wilderness. "Your grandmother stood here every evening before sunset," Hank said. "Called it her thinking spot. Last time I visited her in the hospital, she made me promise to show it to you when the time came." Sarah felt a lump in her throat. Why didn't you tell me this before? Wasn't the right time? You needed to find her journal first. He pointed toward the western fields. That section there, best soil on the property. And that low area collects water perfect for certain crops. Eleanor had plans, big ones. Sarah opened the journal to a page marked with a pressed lavender sprig. A detailed drawing showed the farm transformed, orderly sections, notations for seasonal rotations, even a small orchard. The family doesn't know what they're giving up, she whispered. Question is, Hank said gently, do you? For the first time since arriving, Sarah felt something beyond obligation or nostalgia, something like possibility. The Chicago apartment felt foreign to Sarah now. 2 months of paid leave from Marshall and Associates remained, courtesy of HR's awkward apology for promoting Brad instead of her. We value your 15 years, Sarah, but Brad brings fresh perspectives. Fresh perspectives from a 30-year-old who'd called native plants weeds during his interview. Sarah tossed another stack of design magazines into a donation box. Her phone buzzed, Michael's name on the screen. Hey, favorite cousin, she answered. Just checking in, Michael said. Uncle Robert's been calling everyone, saying you've lost your mind. His words, not mine. Sarah smiled despite herself. Of all the Bennetts, only Michael hadn't tried to persuade her to sell Grandma's farm. Still sane, just determined. So you're really doing this? Giving up Chicago to become a farmer? Taking a sabbatical, Sarah corrected, though her half-packed apartment suggested otherwise. The firm will hold my position for 6 months. And after that, Sarah glanced at Eleanor's garden journal on her coffee table. Let's just say I'm leaving my options open. A text notification interrupted, an email from Evergreen Developments, their 4th improved offer. Delete. Dad's worried about Mom's medical bills, Michael said quietly. That's why he's siding with Uncle Robert. Guilt crept in. Aunt Patricia's MS treatments weren't cheap. I'm not keeping anyone from their inheritance, Michael. I just need time to figure this out before we sell to developers who'll erase every trace of Grandma. I know. Just explaining the pressure. He paused. Found anything interesting there? Sarah crossed to the bookshelf where she'd placed the dusty photo album from Eleanor's bedroom. Actually, yes. An album with photos going back to the 1950s. The farm was incredible, Michael. Fruit orchards, vegetable gardens, even beehives. Nothing like the overgrown fields it is now. She opened to a faded color photograph. Eleanor and Grandpa James standing proudly beside rows of corn, taller than themselves, the red barn freshly painted behind them. The Harvest Festival, 1963, she read from the caption. Grandma's corn won first prize. Hard to imagine. Last time I visited, that barn was practically falling down. That's just it. I can imagine it. I keep seeing what it could be again. After they hung up, Sarah studied more photos. In one, teenage Eleanor stood with her parents beside an oak sapling. The same tree now towered over the eastern field, massive and majestic. Time had transformed a girl's planting into something magnificent. The local cafe in Mapleton, population 3,240, buzzed with morning regulars when Sarah entered 3 days later. Conversations paused, curious eyes tracking her to the counter. Well, if it isn't Eleanor Bennett's granddaughter, said the gray-haired woman behind the register. Her name tag read Darlene. Heard you're staying at the old place. News travels fast, Sarah said, ordering coffee. Small towns, Darlene shrugged. We've also heard developers are offering big money. Sarah took her coffee to a corner table, opening her laptop. Property taxes, insurance estimates, and utility costs filled her spreadsheet. The numbers were daunting. 6 months of savings wouldn't go far. Mind if I join you? A man about her age stood by her table, holding a mug. His weathered hands and tan suggested outdoor work. You're Eleanor's granddaughter. I'm David Nichols, County Agricultural Extension Officer. Sarah gestured to the empty chair. Seems everyone knows who I am. Eleanor was respected here. When a developer starts offering millions for her land barely a month after her funeral, people notice. His directness was refreshing after Chicago's corporate politeness. "I'm weighing my options," Sarah said carefully. David nodded. "Those corporate types painting pictures of economic growth never mention what we lose. 300 acres of prime soil, wildlife habitat, local history gone forever. You sound like my grandmother." He smiled. "I should. She taught me most of what I know about this land." Sarah's phone rang. "Uncle Robert again." She declined the call. "Family pressure?" David asked. "My grandmother's siblings all want to sell. They see dollar signs, not legacy." David's eyes held understanding. "My family lost our orchard to developers when I was in college. Now it's a strip mall with a dying food court. I swore I'd help others avoid that if I could." Outside the cafe window, a billboard advertised Mapleton Meadows, luxury homes coming soon, over an image of identical houses where Pearson's dairy farm had stood for generations. David followed her gaze. "That development broke ground last year. 17 families sold. Now the town has more houses but fewer farms, less independence." "My design firm specialized in planned communities," Sarah admitted. "I helped create places like that." And now, she thought of Eleanor's journal, the photos of thriving fields, Hank's words on her grandmother's thinking spot. "Now I'm not so sure what I want to create." She closed her laptop. "But I know what I don't want to destroy." The law office of Jenkins and Barnett occupied the second floor of Mapleton's oldest brick building. Inside, wood paneling and leather chairs created an atmosphere of somber authority. Sarah waited, thumbing through Eleanor's property documents. "Sorry to keep you waiting." Harold Jenkins entered, spectacles perched on his nose. "Eleanor's affairs weren't complicated, but there are a few matters we should discuss." Sarah nodded. "I'm particularly interested in the original property deed. Grandma mentioned something about a special clause." Harold raised an eyebrow. "She told you about that?" He opened a folder, extracting a yellowed document protected in a plastic sleeve. "The Bennett property has an unusual provision dating back to 1891, when your great-great-grandfather acquired it." Sarah leaned forward as he pointed to faded cursive at the bottom. "It states, 'This land, being part of the natural heritage, carries with it the solemn duty to maintain the heart of the property in perpetuity. Should the heart cease to beat, ownership shall revert to the county trust.' What does that mean legally?" Harold removed his glasses. "It's what we call flowery language, common in 19th century deeds. Most courts would consider it symbolic rather than binding. However, your grandmother took it quite seriously. She made me promise to point it out to whomever inherited the property." He slid another document forward. "This is from her personal files, her interpretation." Sarah read Eleanor's neat handwriting. "The heart of the land beats through cultivation, through stewardship, through respect for what grows and lives here. To let it lie fallow or be covered in concrete would be to silence this heartbeat." "Did she ever explain what the heart refers to?" Harold shook his head. "Eleanor had her secrets. All I know is she refused several lucrative offers over the years, citing this clause." The bell above the door jingled as Sarah entered the Mapleton Historical Society, a converted Victorian house crammed with artifacts and photographs. A woman in her 60s looked up from a computer. "You must be Sarah Bennett." "I'm Martha Gallagher. Harold called to say you might stop by." "I'm trying to understand my grandmother's farm better," Sarah explained. "It's history." Martha led her to a table where she'd arranged several folders. "The Bennett farm has quite a story. It was one of the first in the county to adopt sustainable practices, back when your grandfather returned from World War II with new ideas." Sarah pored over newspaper clippings showing James and Eleanor Bennett receiving agricultural awards, hosting community harvest festivals, and standing proudly with prize-winning produce. People thought James was crazy when he refused certain pesticides in the 1950s. Martha noted. Eleanor was even more committed after he passed. She became something of a local legend, the stubborn old woman who fought off developers with, as she put it, a trowel and pure determination. That sounds like Grandma. Sarah smiled, then grew serious. Did you ever hear her mention the heart of the land? Martha's expression changed. Where did you hear that phrase? It's in the original property deed. Grandma seemed to think it was important. Eleanor wasn't one to share everything she knew, Martha said carefully. But there's a section of the property near the old oak that she was particularly protective of. Said it had special properties. Most folks thought it was just an old woman's superstition. Evening shadows stretched across the farmhouse porch as Sarah sat reviewing her notes. Uncle Robert's B&W kicked up dust as it roared up the driveway. His expensive shoes looked absurdly out of place on the gravel as he approached. This has gone far enough, Sarah, he called. The developers raised their offer again. $5 million plus expedited closing. We all need to move on with our lives. Hello to you too, Uncle Robert. He sighed heavily, lowering himself into a wicker chair that creaked under his weight. Your cousins need their share for college funds. Patricia's medical bills are mounting. And frankly, I have investments that this money would secure. The land isn't just about money, Sarah began. Everything is about money, he interrupted. Eleanor lived in the past. This farm hasn't turned a profit in 20 years. It's a liability, not a legacy. I have 6 months of leave. Give me that, at least. Robert's jaw tightened. The family is losing patience. Either sign the papers by month's end, or we'll petition the court to force a sale. Don't make this ugly, Sarah. After he left, Sarah's hands trembled as she locked the door. The empty house creaked and settled around her. She climbed the stairs to Eleanor's bedroom, seeking comfort in the familiar space. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by strange sounds, rustling in the walls, whispers in the hallway. Just before dawn, Sarah dreamed of Eleanor standing in a lush garden, pointing urgently toward the eastern field. The heart, she said in the dream. You must find the heart. Sarah woke with the first light, the words echoing in her mind. The Bennett family gathering filled Eleanor's modest living room with uncomfortable silence. Sarah had arranged the chairs in a circle, deliberately avoiding a confrontational setup with sides. It hadn't helped. We appreciate your sentimentality, Richard Harrison said, his corporate smile never reaching his eyes. Evergreen Developments understands family attachments to property. Uncle Robert nodded eagerly. Richard has been extremely patient. $5 million is their final offer, well above market value. Sarah studied the contract on the coffee table. Glossy renderings showed Evergreen Estates, with its uniform houses, artificial lake, and clubhouse built where the old barn stood. Could you explain what happens to the existing structures? Sarah asked. Harrison cleared his throat. Full demolition would be necessary. The farmhouse outbuildings and trees don't fit the aesthetic of our planned community. He gestured to the renderings. But we've incorporated a decorative windmill in the Central Park as a nod to the agricultural heritage. Sarah's cousin Teresa spoke up. Mom needs her share for medical treatments. That's real, not sentimental. I understand everyone needs their portion, Sarah said. I'm just asking for time to explore alternatives. What alternatives? Uncle Robert snapped. Playing farmer? You're a landscape architect, not a miracle worker. This place hasn't been profitable for decades. Actually, David Nichols spoke from the corner where he'd been silently observing. There are several grant programs for heritage farm restoration. The USDA has. Who invited him? Uncle Robert interrupted. I did, Sarah said. As the county agricultural agent, David knows what's possible here. Harrison's smile tightened. Miss Bennett, while I respect your desire to explore options, our offer timeline is limited. The project has investors with expectations. We need an answer within 30 days. Cousin Michael, who'd been quiet until now, finally spoke. What if we each get our shares but Sarah gets the time she needs with the property? There must be a compromise. There is no compromise. Uncle Robert stood, face reddening. This is simple. Either we all profit, or Sarah's selfishness costs everyone. That's not fair, Sarah began. Fair? Aunt Patricia's voice trembled. I'm remortgaging my house to pay for treatments. Your cousin Lisa's son needs special education they can't afford. Yet you're holding hostage money that could change their lives for what? Some romantic notion of farming? Harrison slid forward another document. Perhaps this addresses everyone's concerns. It's an option contract. Evergreen provides a good faith payment of $250,000 now, divided among family members. Miss Bennett gets 6 months to explore alternatives. If she finds a viable solution, she can buy out the option by returning our payment plus 10%. Otherwise, the sale proceeds as planned. Murmurs of approval rippled through the family. Sarah felt cornered. I need to think about this. There's nothing to think about, Uncle Robert said flatly. Sign now, or we petition the court for a forced sale. Eleanor may have left you the farm, but she left all of us as beneficiaries to its value. We have rights too. As family members nodded, Sarah realized she was alone, except for Michael's sympathetic glance and David's steady presence in the corner. May I have the room, please? She asked quietly. Everyone filed out onto the porch. Only David lingered. They're not wrong about the financial realities, he said gently. But neither are you about the land's worth beyond dollars. What would you do? Sarah asked. I can't answer that, but I can tell you what happens if Evergreen builds here. He pointed to the renderings. That lake will disrupt natural water flow to neighboring farms. Those identical houses need identical lawns, maintained with chemicals that leach into groundwater. The wildlife corridor along the eastern boundary disappears. Once it's gone forever. After David left, Sarah sat alone, the contract before her. Through the window, she could see Harrison showing her family more glossy images. Uncle Robert laughed at something, slapping Harrison's back like an old friend. The farmhouse creaked around her, as if sharing her distress. Sarah's gaze fell on a black and white photograph on the mantel. Eleanor as a young woman, standing proudly before freshly tilled fields. She had rebuilt this place, after hardship, turning neglected land into something vibrant. From the shelf, Sarah took down a rusted antique watering can, the one Eleanor had used to teach her about nurturing growing things. Water only the roots, Sarah, she'd explained. That's where life begins. Anyone can see the bloom, but caring for what's beneath the soil that takes wisdom. Sarah ran her finger along the watering can's dented spout. Its once shining copper was now green with patina, like the farm itself, broken but not beyond repair. The decision crystallized in her heart before reaching her mind. When she stepped onto the porch to face her waiting family, her voice was steady. I need those 6 months, and I intend to use every day of them. Rain pounded the farmhouse roof like 1,000 impatient fingers. 3 weeks had passed since the family meeting, and Sarah had made little progress beyond clearing some overgrown paths. Tonight's storm was testing the old structure's integrity and her resolve. A thunderous crack split the darkness. Sarah bolted upright in bed as something heavy crashed against the house. Grabbing a flashlight, she hurried downstairs, following the sound of wind whistling through what should have been solid wall. The old oak limb had punched through the kitchen roof, letting in cascades of rain. Water pooled on the linoleum, soaking scattered photographs Sarah had been organizing earlier. She scrambled to save them, but many were already damaged beyond repair. By morning the storm had passed, leaving destruction in its wake. Sarah surveyed the damage from the yard, a gaping hole in the kitchen roof, broken windows, the barn's east wall partially collapsed. Repair estimates would devour most of her savings. Sarah sat on the porch steps, head in hands when her phone rang. The developer's number. Miss Bennett. Richard Harrison here. I heard about the storm damage. These old properties are so vulnerable to the elements. Sarah stiffened. How did you hear already? Small towns, he said smoothly. I thought this might change your perspective on our structural repairs on historical buildings can be prohibitive. Our offer stands, storm damage notwithstanding. After hanging up, Sarah's finger hovered over Uncle Robert's number. One call, and this burden would lift. The family would get their money. She'd return to Chicago, back to designing artificial gardens for people who wanted nature without its inconveniences. The watering can sat on the porch railing where she'd left it, now filled with rainwater. Sarah emptied it onto Eleanor's struggling rosebush, the one she'd been trying to revive since arriving. Problems? Hank called, trudging up the muddy drive. The elderly farmer assessed the damage with a practiced eye. Nothing that can't be fixed. I can't afford to fix it, Sarah admitted. Maybe this is a sign I should accept reality. Storms come and go, Hank said. Eleanor weathered worse. Eleanor wasn't facing a family revolt and a failing roof simultaneously. Hank gestured toward the barn. Come on. There's something you should see. Inside, he moved aside empty feed bags and rusty equipment, revealing a trapdoor. Your grandmother asked me to show you this when you were ready. Thought now might be the time. Sarah followed him down creaking stairs to a root cellar. Hank's flashlight illuminated shelves of dusty canning jars, garden tools, and a small wooden chest. Eleanor left this for you, said you'd know when to open it. The chest contained a sealed envelope and a small leather journal, different from the garden notes Sarah had found earlier. The letter bore her name in Eleanor's handwriting. Upstairs again, Sarah read by the light streaming through the damaged roof. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, you've discovered that the farm holds more than meets the eye. The heart of the land isn't just flowery legal language, it's real. When your grandfather returned from the war, broken in spirit, this land healed him. Not simply through honest work, but through something in the soil itself. The southeastern field, near the old oak, grows things that nourish both body and soul. We never sold those special crops commercially. They were our gifts to those in need. The doctors couldn't explain how Mrs. Peterson's arthritis improved, or how the Lawson boy overcame his stutter. We simply provided vegetables from that field and kept our peace. Some called it superstition. Your grandfather called it a blessing. I call it responsibility. This farm isn't just land, it's legacy, healing, and hope. The journal contains everything I know about the heart of the land. Trust yourself, Sarah. You've always had the gift. All my love, Grandma Eleanor. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the journal. Detailed notes documented unusual growth patterns, special cultivation methods, and names of community members who'd benefited from the farm's bounty over decades. A knock at the door interrupted her reading. A thin man in his 70s stood outside, leaning on a cane. You don't know me, he said. I'm Walter Kelsey. I heard Eleanor Bennett's granddaughter was fixing up the old place. Not fixing much at the moment, Sarah gestured at the damaged roof. Your grandmother helped my family once, long ago. He handed her an envelope. Thought it might be time to return the favor. My sons run a construction company now. They'll repair your roof, no charge. After he left, Sarah opened the envelope to find old photographs of a young Walter receiving a basket of produce from Eleanor. His note read, "The doctors gave me 3 months. After eating from your grandmother's garden for a summer, I've had 50 good years. Some debts can't be repaid, but we try." Sarah looked around at the storm-battered farm with new eyes. Something stirred within her, purpose replacing doubt. She gathered Eleanor's journals, the photographs, and the damaged watering can. By evening, she had created a makeshift workspace on the porch. The watering can, now cleaned and mended with careful soldering, sat beside Eleanor's journals. Tomorrow she would begin. 1 month in, and Sarah's muscles ached in ways her Chicago gym had never managed. Her hands, once manicured and soft, now bore calluses and dirt that no amount of scrubbing could remove. She liked them better this way. The eastern field, where Eleanor had mentioned the heart might be, had become her focus. Years of neglect had transformed it into a tangled mess of brambles, saplings, and invasive species competing for dominance. She attacked it section by section, filling notebook pages with observations. "You're doing it wrong," came Hank's voice from behind her. He stood watching as Sarah struggled with a stubborn root system. "There's a right way to pull weeds." Sarah wiped sweat from her brow. "There's a right way to understand this land." Hank lowered himself to the ground beside her, his weathered hands moving with surprising agility. "See these?" He pointed to tiny white flowers barely visible among the weeds. "Wild strawberry. Clearing everything at once will destroy what's worth saving. I thought I needed to start fresh. Land's got a memory. Good things might be hiding, waiting for the right conditions." He demonstrated a gentler clearing technique. "Your grandmother understood that. She could look at a field and see what wanted to grow there." As Hank instructed her on identifying native plants worth preserving, Sarah noticed how the older man's eyes constantly scanned the surroundings, reading the landscape like a book. "How did you learn all this?" she asked. "Grew up farming, like most folks my age around here. But your grandmother taught me to see beyond just crops and yields." He pointed toward the rolling hills beyond the property. "This whole valley has underground springs feeding it. Makes the soil special." Sarah remembered something. Grandma mentioned springs in her journal. Back at the farmhouse, Sarah retrieved Eleanor's records. Among the pages was a hand-drawn map, faded but detailed, showing a network of underground water sources beneath the property. The southeastern field, near the old oak, was marked with a star and the notation, "Strongest flow, sweetest water." "Well, I'll be," Hank murmured. "Eleanor never showed me this. Can these springs still be active after all these years? Underground water doesn't just disappear. Might be why this area stays greener, even in drought years." Sarah studied the map. This could explain why Grandma called it the heart. It's literally feeding the entire property. That evening, David arrived with soil testing equipment, brought the county gear as promised. "We can get preliminary readings today, but comprehensive results take a few weeks." Sarah showed him Eleanor's map. "We might be sitting on a network of natural springs," David whistled. "That would explain a lot." The county water survey indicated something unusual in this area, but nothing this extensive. He studied the map. "Mind if I take this to compare with our geological survey?" As the sun lowered, casting golden light across the newly cleared sections, David collected soil samples while Sarah documented their locations. They worked well together, falling into an efficient rhythm without needing much conversation. "The preliminary pH readings are ideal for growing," David noted, checking his instruments. "Better than they should be for land that's been neglected." "Maybe the land wasn't as neglected as we thought," Sarah said. "Grandma might have been doing things we don't know about yet." Later, as they sat on the porch reviewing their findings, Sarah noticed David studying her. "What?" she asked. "You've changed since that first meeting in the cafe," he observed. "You moved differently, more connected to the place." Sarah hadn't thought about it, but he was right. "The land has a way of teaching you what it needs, if you pay attention." "That sounds like something Eleanor would say." David smiled. "She mentioned you often, you know. Said you were the only one who inherited her gift." "Gift? For seeing potential. For patience." He gestured toward the partially cleared field, now revealed to have natural contours perfect for terraced planting. "Most people would have brought in bulldozers, leveled everything, and started from scratch. You're revealing what's already there." The conversation was interrupted by a notification on Sarah's phone. She'd started documenting her progress on a farm restoration blog, mostly as a personal journal. What had begun as 0 followers had somehow grown to over 500. "Looks like people are interested in what you're doing," David noted, glancing at the screen. "Just some friends from Chicago, probably," Sarah dismissed, though she knew that wasn't true. As David packed up his equipment, he paused. "The county has some heritage agriculture grants available. Small amounts, but they might help with equipment or seeds. I could bring the paperwork tomorrow." "That would be great," Sarah said, surprised at her own enthusiasm. After he left, she sat alone on the porch, watching fireflies emerge in the twilight. The farm felt less abandoned now, as if it were slowly waking from a long sleep. Sarah opened her notebook and began sketching plans for the southeastern field, guided by Eleanor's map and her own growing intuition about what the land wanted to become. Sarah wiped dust from the wooden box she'd discovered in the back of Eleanor's pantry. It was sturdy oak, carved with delicate vines and flowers. Inside, neatly organized recipe cards filled the compartments, some yellowed with age, others newer, but in the same flowing handwriting. "Bennett Family Recipes," read the label on the first divider. Sarah flipped through the cards: cornbread, pickled beans, blackberry cobbler, each with notes about which field or garden patch the ingredients came from. "Southeast field tomatoes make the richest sauce," one note read. Another specified, "Use only strawberries from the oak tree patch for this preserves recipe. They have special properties." The word properties was underlined twice. Sarah brought the recipe box to the kitchen table where David was reviewing the soil test results he'd received from the county lab. "Find something?" he asked, looking up from his paperwork. "Grandma's recipes. Very specific about where ingredients should come from." She showed him the strawberry preserves card. "Interesting." David pushed the lab results toward her. "And these might explain why. Your soil has unusual mineral content, particularly in the southeastern section, high in trace elements that are typically depleted in commercial farmland. This combination would produce nutrient-dense crops." "Could that explain the special properties Eleanor mentioned? People feeling better after eating food grown here?" David considered. "There's growing research on how soil microbiome affects nutritional content. Plants grown in rich, diverse soil produce different phytonutrients than those grown in depleted soil. It's not magic, but it might seem that way to people used to modern nutrient-poor food." Sarah finished. Sarah's phone rang. "Cousin Michael." "Just checking in," he said. "Uncle Robert's been making noise about legal action again." Sarah sighed. "I've still got 5 months left on our agreement." "I know, but he's impatient. The developers keep pressuring him." Michael paused. "Any progress worth reporting that might keep him calm?" Sarah looked at David across the table, at the recipe box, at the soil reports showing remarkable growing potential. "Tell him I'm exploring heritage crop cultivation with university backing." Not entirely true yet, but not entirely false either. After hanging up, Sarah studied the recipe for Eleanor's famous tomato sauce. "I wish I could taste this. Prove what the land can do." "You could," David said. "Plant now, harvest late summer." Traditional agricultural timelines don't always apply to small-scale intensive gardening. The following day, Sarah's blog post about Eleanor's recipe box received unexpected attention. Comments flooded in. "My grandmother swore by Eleanor Bennett's strawberry preserves for her arthritis." "Mom used to drive an hour just to buy tomatoes from your grandmother's roadside stand." "Our family doctor actually prescribed vegetables from Bennett Farm when I was anemic as a teenager." Nothing else worked. Sarah showed these to David when he arrived with seedling trays. "Looks like you're developing a community support network," he noted. "This could be important if legal challenges come." Together they prepared a small plot near the old oak tree. David demonstrated how to build raised beds using reclaimed wood from the damaged barn section. "The county extension office just got approval for a heritage farm initiative," he mentioned as they worked. "Grant money for preserving historical agricultural practices and crops. Your property would qualify. That's wonderful, but I need to show results first. Prove what the land can do." "You're fortunate," David said, gently placing tomato seedlings into the prepared soil. "Most people inherit just land. You inherited knowledge too." He nodded toward the recipe box sitting on a nearby stump. That evening, Sarah hosted an impromptu gathering on the farmhouse porch. David, Hank, Martha from the Historical Society, and several local farmers curious about her project. They sat drinking iced tea as the sun set, sharing stories about Eleanor. "She always knew what would grow best where," one farmer recalled. Folks thought she was just experienced, but it was more than that. My grandmother called it having dirt sense, said another. Some people just understand land better than others. Martha from the Historical Society cleared her throat. There's something you should all know. The county board is reviewing zoning regulations next month. Developers are pushing to reclassify agricultural land for residential use. The group fell silent. If that happens, heritage farms like this one lose protection, Martha continued. Tax rates change. Operating restrictions increase. Can they do that? Sarah asked. With enough money and influence, yes. Martha looked pointedly at the cleared field visible in the fading light. Unless someone presents a compelling case for agricultural preservation, like a working heritage farm with community significance, David suggested. Exactly, like that, Martha nodded. But it would need community support. Documented historical importance. Proven agricultural viability. After everyone left, Sarah sat alone on the porch, Eleanor's recipe box in her lap. What had started as a personal journey was becoming something larger. It wasn't just about saving Grandma's farm anymore. It was about preserving something that mattered to the entire community. She opened her laptop and typed a new blog post title, Friends of Eleanor's Farm. Beneath it she wrote, "My grandmother's land has been feeding this community for generations. I think it's time we returned the favor. Here's how you can help." By morning, 47 people had responded. The root cellar felt 10 degrees cooler than the summer heat outside. Sarah held her flashlight steady as Hank shifted aside dusty canning equipment, revealing a small wooden cabinet built into the earthen wall. Eleanor mentioned this in her last days. Hank explained, his arthritic fingers working the simple latch. Said when the time was right, you'd need what's inside. The cabinet door creaked open, revealing dozens of carefully labeled glass jars, each containing seeds. Some labels dated back 30 years or more. The handwriting varying from Eleanor's young, precise script to her later, shakier hand. Heritage seeds, Sarah breathed, lifting a jar marked Oak Field Tomatoes 1992. Not just heritage, Hank corrected. These are seeds from plants grown on this specific land, adapted to this soil, this climate, over generations. Irreplaceable. Sarah carefully arranged the jars on a folding table. Each was meticulously labeled with variety name, year harvested, and specific field location. Some bore additional notes, resistant to late blight, or exceptional flavor in drought years. Your grandmother was practicing sustainable agriculture before it had a name, Hank said. Each generation of plants slightly better adapted than the last. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from David, county agricultural expert arriving tomorrow, important for grant application. Don't worry. He's supportive. The farm had come alive in the 6 weeks since Sarah had started clearing the fields. The small test plot near the oak was already showing promising results, tomato plants twice the expected size. Herb seedlings bursting with vigor. Sarah had expanded to 3 more plots, using Eleanor's garden journals as guides. Local volunteers now appeared on weekends, retired farmers offering advice, teenagers earning community service hours, families bringing picnic lunches, and staying to pull weeds. Sarah's blog had grown to over 2,000 followers, many from surrounding counties. That evening, as Sarah catalogued the seed collection on her laptop, a car crunched up the gravel driveway, Uncle Robert's BMW parking beside her mud-splattered pickup. "Didn't expect a visit," Sarah said, meeting him on the porch. "Thought I'd see how you're spending the family's money." His tone was civil, but cold. "The 6-month deadline approaches. I still have over 4 months." Robert surveyed the partially restored fields, the new raised beds, the small greenhouse frame being constructed near the barn. "Playing farmer seems to amuse you." "It's not playing, Uncle Robert. This land has potential." "Potential for what?" "Growing vegetables you could buy at any supermarket." He shook his head. "Your blog makes entertaining reading, but sentiment doesn't pay bills." Sarah bit back a sharp response. I'm documenting a viable agricultural enterprise. The county extension office is helping with grant applications. Grants? Robert snorted. Pocket change compared to $5 million. Your cousins need real money for college, medical bills, not organic tomatoes. After he left, Sarah sat on the porch steps, his words echoing. Was this all sentimentality? The seed collection, while historically significant, wouldn't sway profit-minded relatives. Her phone chimed with a notification. The soil specialist, David, had posted preliminary findings on the project forum. Mineral composition analyses of Bennett Farm's southeastern quadrant show exceptional levels of trace minerals beneficial to plant and human health. Further study warranted. Below this, comments accumulated rapidly. Could explain why Eleanor's produce was sought after by people with chronic conditions. My grandmother swore Bennett tomatoes cured her digestive issues when doctors couldn't help. Those heritage seeds might be worth more than the land itself to the right agricultural company. That last comment gave Sarah pause. She hadn't considered the commercial value of Eleanor's seed collection. Plants specifically adapted to thrive in this soil, producing nutrient-dense food with potential health benefits. The next morning, Sarah and David carefully transported seed samples to the county extension office for viability testing. The agricultural expert, Dr. Abrams, examined them with undisguised excitement. Some of these varieties may be extinct elsewhere, he noted, studying the labeled jars, adapted through selective saving over. How many generations? At least 4 that I know of, Sarah answered. My great-great-grandfather started the farm in 1891. Dr. Abrams nodded. Modern industrial agriculture favors uniformity and yield over nutrition and adaptability. These seeds represent the opposite approach. They could be invaluable for sustainable farming research. Sarah felt a surge of hope until she returned to the farm that afternoon. A no trespassing sign had been posted at the entrance, and a legal notice was taped to the porch door. Uncle Robert had filed for partition, a legal process to force division or sale of jointly inherited property. As she read the document, a truck pulled up. A young man approached with a clipboard. Miss Bennett? I'm from the county zoning office. We've received complaints about unauthorized agricultural activities on this property. I need to verify your permits. Permits? This has been a working farm for over a century. Yes, ma'am, but after 3 years of non-agricultural use, it reverted to residential zoning. Commercial farming requires rezoning approval. Sarah's phone rang. David calling with news about the seed testing. But before she could answer, the screen flashed with a weather alert. Severe storm warning for the next 3 days. The seedlings they'd just planted wouldn't survive without protection. Sarah looked from the legal notice to the worried zoning officer, to the darkening sky. Everything was happening at once, closing in like the approaching storm clouds. 6 months to the day since Sarah had refused to sign the development contract. 3 months since the storm that had nearly destroyed her seedlings. The farm had transformed, and so had she. Sarah stood on Eleanor's thinking spot, surveying what they'd accomplished. 4 fields now showed organized rows of crops, tomatoes, beans, herbs, and heritage vegetables, all grown from Eleanor's seeds. The barn roof was repaired, its red paint fresh against the blue summer sky. The farmhouse kitchen gleamed with new countertops built from reclaimed barnwood, where they processed the first small harvests. But the transformation came with costs. Her savings were depleted. The legal battle with Uncle Robert had drained her resources and energy. The county zoning board remained deadlocked on reclassifying the property, and in exactly 6 weeks, the developer's option contract would come due. Sarah's phone rang. Michael with his weekly check-in. How are things, he asked, genuine concern in his voice. Beautiful and terrifying, Sarah answered honestly. The southeast field is producing better than any of us expected. People are noticing, but Uncle Robert won't back down, and the money's running out, Michael finished. The family meeting next week won't be easy. Everyone's expecting their share from the sale. After hanging up, Sarah retreated to the farmhouse attic, seeking solace in Eleanor's belongings. She opened a cedar chest she hadn't explored before, finding neatly folded quilts. The top one caught her eye, a patchwork map of the farm, with different fabrics representing fields, buildings, and the winding creek. One section in the southeast corner remained unfinished, its backing exposed, threads waiting for completion. "You found it." Martha from the Historical Society stood in the doorway. "Eleanor's farm quilt. She worked on it for years. Why is this section unfinished?" Sarah pointed to the gap. She never said, just that it wasn't time yet. Martha sat beside Sarah. "The zoning board meets tomorrow. We've gathered signatures supporting your heritage farm designation, but developer money speaks loudly." Sarah nodded, tracing the quilt's patterns. "This missing piece, it's exactly where the heart would be. The special field with the underground springs." That evening the friends of Eleanor's farm gathered in the newly cleared barn. What had started as a handful of curious neighbors had grown to over 60 regular volunteers. Today they were processing the first significant harvest, washing, sorting and packing vegetables for the weekend farmers market. "The tomatoes are incredible," marveled Lisa, a local nutritionist who'd joined the project. "Twice the size they should be, and the flavor is extraordinary. And these," David held up vibrant green beans. "I've tested the nutrient content. They have mineral levels you don't see in commercial produce." Sarah watched the community she'd built, retirees working alongside teenagers, neighbors who'd been strangers 3 months ago, now laughing together. This was part of what Eleanor had created and protected, not just crops, but connection. "Attention everyone," Sarah called. "First, thank you. None of this would exist without you. Tomorrow's farmers market is our debut and our test. If sales go well, we can show my family there's financial potential here, beyond development." Cheers erupted, but Sarah raised her hand. "But there's something you should know. The option contract expires in 6 weeks. If we can't raise enough to buy it out, or convince my family of this farm's worth, we'll lose everything we've built." A somber quiet settled. Then Hank stood, his weathered face determined. "Eleanor Bennett saw me through drought years when my own farm nearly failed. Said her land had enough blessing for us both." His voice strengthened. "Now it's our turn to stand for her land. I'm contributing my equipment repair skills full-time until we're secure." Others joined in. Offers of tools, labor, legal assistance, marketing help. Sarah felt a lump in her throat at their generosity. This was community in its purest form, something no development could create. Later, as the volunteers departed with small baskets of vegetables as thanks, David lingered, helping Sarah close up the barn. "I've been wondering," he said hesitantly, "about the unfinished section of Eleanor's quilt. What about it? The county has ground-penetrating radar equipment for water surveys. If there's something special about that southeastern field, beyond just good soil," Sarah considered. Their relationship had deepened over months of working side by side, his expertise complementing her growing intuition about the land. She trusted him completely now. "Let's do it," she decided, but quietly. "If Uncle Robert learns we're looking for something specific, he'll assume there's profit in it," David finished. "First thing tomorrow, before the farmer's market. I'll bring the equipment at dawn." As they walked toward the farmhouse in the gathering dusk, movement caught Sarah's eye, a flash of metal near the tool shed. When she investigated, she found only disturbed earth and footprints leading toward the road. Someone had been watching them. That night Sarah dreamed of Eleanor standing in the unfinished section of the quilt, beckoning. "The heart," her grandmother said in the dream. "Follow the water to find the heart." Dawn painted the fields in gentle gold as David calibrated the ground-penetrating radar equipment. Sarah watched, clutching Eleanor's journal, its pages marked with references to the southeastern field, the heart of the land. "This technology can detect changes in density beneath the surface," David explained. "Caves, water sources, even old foundations. They worked systematically, moving in grid patterns across the field, David monitoring the digital readouts while Sarah mapped their progress. Mid-morning, the equipment emitted a series of rapid beeps. Found something, David said, marking the spot. They continued mapping until the entire field was covered, then reviewed the digital rendering on David's tablet. It's a well, he said finally, pointing to a circular formation on the screen. Old one, probably hand-dug. Looks like it connects to the spring network we found earlier. They located the spot, now overgrown with wild blackberries and meadow grass. After clearing the vegetation, they discovered a stone circle, its center filled with compacted earth and small rocks. Seems deliberately covered, Sarah said, kneeling to examine the stonework. Her fingers traced unusual markings carved into the rock's spirals, plants, and what appeared to be phases of the moon. These aren't just decorative, David said. They're agricultural symbols, ancient markers for planting seasons. He photographed them from different angles. The county historian needs to see these. They carefully removed the covering materials, revealing a still intact well shaft, lined with fitted stones. The water level sat about 15 feet below, clear and reflecting the sky above. Your grandmother must have known about this, David said. The question is, why keep it hidden? Before Sarah could respond, a car horn sounded. The farmers' market team had arrived to collect the harvest. They'd have to investigate further later. The Mapleton Farmers' Market occupied the town square each Saturday. Today, friends of Eleanor's farm had their first official stall, displaying vegetables grown from Eleanor's seeds. Sarah arranged tomatoes that gleamed like jewels under the morning sun, deep reds, sunny yellows, and heirloom purples. These are gorgeous, said a woman examining a tomato. Are they organic? Beyond organic, Sarah explained. Grown from heritage seeds adapted to our specific soil over generations. By noon, a crowd had gathered. News of Eleanor's vegetables had spread, particularly among older residents who remembered her legendary produce. Sarah could barely keep up with sales, while David handled questions about their growing methods. My arthritis always improved when I ate Eleanor's tomatoes, an elderly man told the gathering crowd. Doctors called it coincidence. Eleanor just smiled and said it was good dirt. As Sarah tallied their sales, far exceeding expectations, she noticed Richard Harrison, the developer, watching from across the square. Beside him stood Uncle Robert, his expression darkening as he observed the farm's success. That afternoon, as they celebrated their market triumph at the farm, Dr. Abrams arrived from the county extension office, eager to see the discovered well. Remarkable preservation, he noted, examining the stone structure. And these symbols, he traced the carvings with reverent fingers. They're consistent with early settler agricultural practices, possibly influenced by indigenous knowledge. Could this water source explain why plants grow so well in this field? Sarah asked. It's certainly part of the equation. The mineral composition of this water is unusual, high in trace elements often depleted in modern soils. He collected water samples in small vials. I'd like to run comprehensive tests. After the extension agent left, Sarah and David sat by the well as evening approached, discussing their next steps. The farmers' market success had proven the farm's commercial potential, but it wouldn't be enough to buy out the developer's option in just 6 weeks. We need to understand what makes this place special, Sarah said. There's more to it than just good water and soil. Your grandmother knew, David replied. The question is, did she leave more clues? Their conversation was interrupted by approaching footsteps. David tensed, but Sarah recognized the familiar gait. Been a while since anyone paid attention to that old well, Hank said, lowering himself carefully to sit beside them. Your grandfather covered it in the 70s after a particularly dry season. Didn't want neighbors knowing we had water when their wells ran dry. Grandpa James did this, Sarah asked, surprised. Protecting the heart of the land, Hank nodded. That's what Eleanor called it. Said as long as this well flowed, the farm would too. He reached into his pocket, extracting a weathered leather notebook. Found this when cleaning my attic. Your grandmother left it with me 30 years ago. said to give it to whoever next tended the well. The small book was filled with Eleanor's handwriting, detailed observations of weather patterns spanning decades. Daily temperature, rainfall, frost dates, all meticulously recorded alongside notes about crop performance. She was tracking climate patterns, David said, amazed, long before most scientists were paying attention to these shifts. Eleanor always said farming wasn't just about this season, but the next, and the next after that. Hank gazed at the well. She understood cycles, how everything returns if you're patient enough to wait. As dusk deepened, they covered the well again, not with rocks, but with a simple wooden lid. David crafted from barn scraps. Sarah placed one of Eleanor's special tomatoes beside it, an offering of gratitude. Walking back to the farmhouse, Sarah felt a deepening connection to the land and a growing certainty that they were on the right path. But the developer's deadline loomed, and Uncle Robert's determined opposition cast a long shadow over their progress. 1 year ago today, Eleanor Bennett had drawn her final breath. Sarah stood at her grandmother's grave, sunflowers in hand, grown from Eleanor's own seeds, nurtured in the soil she had tended for decades. "I think you'd be proud," Sarah whispered, placing the flowers against the simple headstone. The farm is coming back to life. The farm's transformation was undeniable. 4 productive fields now yielded impressive harvests. The barn housed a small commercial kitchen, where volunteers processed value-added products. Tomato sauce, pickles, jams, all from Eleanor's recipes. Their farmer's market stall had expanded to 3 tables, with regular customers arriving early to secure their favorites. But the deadline loomed. 3 weeks remained before the developer's option expired. The family meeting was scheduled for tomorrow, and Sarah still lacked enough capital to buy them out. Back at the farmhouse, Sarah opened her laptop to update the farm's progress on their growing website. A notification appeared, an email from a university agricultural department requesting seeds for their heritage preservation program. 3rd request this month, David noted, glancing over her shoulder. He'd brought lunch from town, a small celebration for their farmiversary, he'd called it. Everyone's interested in Eleanor's seeds now that they've seen the results. Sarah sighed. But interest doesn't pay Uncle Robert. David cleared space at the kitchen table, laying out sandwiches. The county extension office evaluated your produce. Nutritional density tests came back exceptional, some metrics off their charts. There's real commercial potential here beyond local markets. In 5 years, maybe. We have 3 weeks. Actually, David hesitated. I've been approached by Heartland Natural Foods. They're interested in exclusive rights to produce grown from Eleanor's seed stock. The offer includes funding for expanding operations. Sarah stared at him. You've been negotiating with distributors behind my back. Not negotiating, exploring options. After your uncle showed up at the farmer's market taking photos and making threats, I thought we needed backup plans. Their conversation was interrupted by Hank's arrival. The elderly farmer carried a battered metal box. Found this in my old storage shed. Been meaning to bring it over. Inside was a stack of weathered notebooks. Eleanor's weather diaries. She kept daily records for over 50 years. Sarah leafed through the meticulous entries, temperature readings, rainfall amounts, frost dates, all recorded in Eleanor's precise hand. The earliest notebook dated to 1968, the most recent ended just weeks before her death. She documented climate shifts decades before most scientists were paying attention. David said, amazed. These are historically significant. Sarah noticed patterns in her grandmother's notes, correlations between weather conditions and planting locations. Eleanor hadn't just recorded weather. She'd developed a sophisticated understanding of microclimate effects on their specific fields. This is why she knew exactly what to plant where. Sarah realized it wasn't just intuition, it was data gathered over decades. David studied the most recent journal. These final entries, she was mapping unusual weather patterns, predicting shifts that would affect growing conditions. This is cutting-edge climate adaptation work. As evening approached, locals gathered at the farm, a small remembrance for Eleanor, organized by the Friends group. They shared stories about her generosity, wisdom, and uncanny ability to grow what people needed most. My son wouldn't eat vegetables until Eleanor gave him cherry tomatoes from her special patch, one woman recalled. Said they tasted like sunshine. He's a nutritionist now. She always knew what would grow best where, Hank added, and when to plant it. Farmers for miles would adjust their schedules based on when Eleanor Bennett put seeds in the ground. As the gathering dispersed, a local reporter approached Sarah. The Mapleton Gazette is doing a feature on historical farms threatened by development. Would you comment on the importance of preserving agricultural heritage? The resulting article appeared online the next morning, just hours before the family meeting. Sarah read it nervously. Bennett Farm, a living laboratory of agricultural history. The piece detailed Eleanor's decades of climate documentation, the historical significance of the well, and the exceptional nutritional value of crops grown from her adapted seed. It included quotes from university researchers about the scientific importance of the farm's unbroken agricultural lineage. Sarah's phone rang continuously. Cousin Michael expressing surprise, Aunt Patricia asking questions, Uncle Robert demanding to know what stunt she was pulling. Even the developer called, his tone notably less confident. By afternoon, Sarah was exhausted, but ready. She gathered her presentation materials, crop yield data, market sales figures, seed preservation significance, and the weather journals. As she prepared to leave for the family meeting in town, she paused by Eleanor's rocking chair on the porch. A wave of dizziness swept over her. The room tilted, sounds becoming distant. Sarah gripped the chair, fighting sudden nausea and chills. David's concerned voice seemed to come from far away. "Are you okay?" She tried to respond but couldn't form words. The last thing she saw before collapsing was Eleanor's weather journal falling from her hands, pages fluttering open to an entry from exactly 1 year ago, the day of her death. "The heart of the land knows," Eleanor had written. "It always protects its own." White hospital walls surrounded Sarah when she woke. David dozed in a chair beside her bed, his hand loosely holding hers. "Hey," she croaked, throat dry. David jolted awake. "Thank God. You've been out for almost 2 days. 2 days?" Panic surged. "The family meeting. Michael postponed it. Told everyone you collapsed from exhaustion." He poured water from a nearby pitcher. "Doctor says it was severe dehydration and stress." Sarah sipped slowly, memories returning. "I was fine, then suddenly." "You pushed too hard," David said gently. Even Eleanor took rest days. The hospital released her that afternoon with strict instructions to take it easy. As David drove her home, Sarah noticed a change in the landscape overnight, it seemed. Summer had fully arrived. The roadside wildflowers had exploded into bloom, trees were lush with leaves, and the farm fields they passed were vibrant with growth. At the farmhouse, Sarah was surprised to find Michael waiting on the porch. "Thought I'd check on my favorite cousin," he said, hugging her carefully. "You scared us." Inside, Michael revealed he'd brought a box of Eleanor's papers, found in the family attorney's office. "Been going through Grandma's legal stuff since you got sick. Thought there might be something to help your case." Sarah sorted through documents, property tax records, correspondence with agricultural organizations, and a folder labeled development offers. She kept records of every proposal. Michael noted, going back decades, the folder contained rejection letters to various developers, each citing Eleanor's commitment to agricultural preservation. But one document caught Sarah's attention. A bank letter from 2018. "Dear Miss Bennett, regarding your inquiry about the mineral assessment of your property. Our financing department cannot approve a loan against potential mineral rights without further geological verification. While initial samples suggest unusual composition in the southeastern quadrant, we recommend professional evaluation before proceeding. We appreciate your interest in Bennett Savings and Trust. Mineral rights?" Sarah looked up, confused. "Keep reading," Michael urged. It gets interesting. A handwritten note from Eleanor was paperclipped to the letter. Third bank with same response. They don't understand it's not about mining. The soil itself is the treasure. Sarah's mind raced. This might explain why she refused to sell. She knew something about the land's composition that made it especially valuable. And why Uncle Robert's been so insistent, Michael added. I found this too. He handed her a geological survey dated 5 years earlier, commissioned by Robert Bennett without Eleanor's knowledge. Certain sections were highlighted, all referencing unusual mineral deposits in the southeastern field. He's known all along, Sarah whispered. That's why he wouldn't give me time. There's more, Michael said. I called in a favor from a friend at the university geology department. She analyzed soil samples from your southeastern field. He showed her a laboratory report on his tablet. Sarah wasn't a scientist, but even she could see the unusual readings, rare earth elements and mineral compounds highlighted in red, with exceptional concentration notation. The composition is unique, Michael explained. Something about the underground water source interacting with the soil creates perfect conditions for hypernutrient density in crops. It's not just good farming, it's literally special dirt. That's why Eleanor's produce had such extraordinary properties. Sarah realized the plants absorbed these minerals and why your test crops are showing the same results, Michael added. You're not just preserving history, Sarah. You're sitting on an agricultural goldmine. The implications were overwhelming. Not only did this explain the plant's unusual properties, but it dramatically changed the farm's economic equation. Heritage crops grown in this soil could command premium prices for their exceptional nutritional content, far beyond typical organic produce. As darkness fell, Sarah sat on the porch, processing this revelation. The developer's deadline still loomed, but the dynamic had shifted. The land's value went beyond sentimental or historical. It had unique properties that could make it commercially valuable while preserving its agricultural purpose. Her phone rang, David calling from the county extension office where he'd been researching agricultural conservation easements. You need to see this, he said without preamble. I found something in the county archives testing reports Eleanor commissioned in 1992. She was analyzing the soil composition after that big earthquake, remember? The one that changed some of the local spring flows. What did she find? The same mineral anomalies we're seeing now, but she took it further. There are crop yield studies, nutritional analyses, even medical observations from people who consumed the produce regularly. His voice quickened with excitement. Sarah, she was documenting measurable health benefits 3 decades ago, long before terms like nutraceutical existed. That's why she was so protective, Sarah said. She wasn't just being stubborn. Exactly. So there's something else. Records of rejected offers from pharmaceutical companies interested in exclusive growing rights. One for over $2 million in 1997. And get this, the last company to approach her, the one she turned down just before she died. A subsidiary of Evergreen Development's parent corporation. The pieces clicked into place. This wasn't just about building luxury homes, it was about controlling the unique properties of the land, properties Eleanor had protected her entire life. Sarah looked out at the fields, now lush with crops grown from her grandmother's seeds in her grandmother's special soil. For the first time she understood the true meaning of Eleanor's words, the heart of the land. She wasn't just saving a farm, she was protecting a legacy, with implications far beyond what anyone had imagined. Even the restoration of the old barn's eastern section revealed surprises with each board they removed. Sarah, David and 3 volunteers worked methodically, salvaging usable materials while carefully dismantling damaged portions. Look at this, called Marco, one of the local high school students who'd become a regular volunteer. He pointed to unusual markings on the interior wall, revealed when they'd removed rotted siding. Sarah examined the faded symbols, similar to those they'd found on the well stones, but more elaborate. These looked deliberate and old, David added, tracing the weathered carvings. This section of the barn dates to the 1860s according to county records. As they removed more damaged boards, a pattern emerged. The symbols formed a line pointing toward the southeastern corner of the structure. Sarah followed their direction to a section of flooring that, unlike the rest of the barn, consisted of fitted stones rather than packed earth. "This is unusual construction for a barn this age," David noted, kneeling to examine the stonework. Sarah noticed one stone slightly raised above the others. When she pressed it, it shifted. "Help me with this." Together they moved the stone, revealing a small hollow beneath. Inside sat a metal box, green with age. "Should we open it?" David asked. "It's on my property," Sarah replied, "and given everything we've learned, I think it was meant to be found." The box contained a leather-bound journal, its pages brittle with age, and a sealed letter addressed simply to the keeper of the heart. Sarah carefully opened the journal first. Inside was an account written in 1867 by Thomas Bennett, her great-great-grandfather. It detailed how the Bennett farm had served as a station on the Underground Railroad, with the barn's hidden chamber providing temporary shelter for escaped slaves traveling north to freedom. "I knew the farm was old, but this—" Sarah's voice trailed off as she continued reading. Thomas Bennett described how a group of freedom seekers, including a woman with knowledge of traditional African and Caribbean herbalism, had stayed longer than usual when one of their children fell ill. The healer had identified special properties in plants grown near the underground spring, using them to create remedies that saved the child's life. In gratitude, she had shared her knowledge with the Bennett family, marking the special growing areas with symbols to indicate what should be planted where and when. "These symbols," David said, pointing to the wall marking, "they're agricultural guidance based on traditional knowledge from Africa and the Caribbean, adapted for this specific land." The journal contained detailed drawings of the symbols with explanations of their meanings, when to plant, which crops benefited from proximity, how to work with the natural cycles of the specific fields. "This is incredible," Sarah whispered. Eleanor wasn't just being intuitive or superstitious. She was following a sophisticated agricultural tradition passed down through generations. With trembling fingers, she opened the sealed letter. The handwriting matched Thomas Bennett's journal. "To whoever finds this record, you hold the true legacy of this land, not merely soil and water, but knowledge preserved when so much was lost." The woman who blessed our farm with her wisdom was called Esther. She entrusted us with growing techniques developed over centuries, techniques that white settlers like myself had neither the wisdom nor patience to develop. I make this record so that her knowledge will not be forgotten. The symbols mark the heart of the land, where water, soil, and ancient understanding create abundance beyond ordinary farming. I charge my descendants to protect this place, not merely as property, but as living history and continuing promise. The heart must keep beating. Thomas Bennett, 1867. Sarah and David sat in stunned silence, surrounded by the physical evidence of a history far richer and more complex than they'd imagined. "This changes everything," David finally said. "The farm isn't just agriculturally or geologically significant. It's historically important. A documented underground railroad station with preserved agricultural techniques from African traditions. The Historical Society needs to see this." Sarah agreed. Martha from the Historical Society arrived within the hour, barely containing her excitement as she examined the documents. "This is extraordinary," she confirmed. "With this documentation, the farm would qualify for historical preservation status. Development would be legally restricted. That's why Eleanor was so cryptic about the heart of the land." Sarah realized she was protecting multiple layers of significance: the special soil, the agricultural techniques, and this historical connection, and explaining it outright might have attracted the wrong kind of attention. David added, "Treasure hunters, development pressure." Martha carefully photographed everything for the Historical Society records. "I'll contact the State Historical Preservation Office immediately. This kind of intact site with original documentation is exceptionally rare." That evening, Sarah called a meeting of the core friends of Eleanor's farm group, sharing their discovery. The revelation transformed their understanding of what they'd been working to preserve. Not just a family farm, but a site of historical resistance, knowledge preservation, and cultural exchange. The family meeting is tomorrow, Sarah told them. With this new information, we have legal grounds to block development regardless of what my relatives want. Your uncle won't give up easily, Hank warned. He's invested too much in making this sale happen, which makes me wonder what he already knows, Sarah replied, studying Thomas Bennett's journal, and what else we might still discover about the heart of the land. The certified letter arrived 3 days before the rescheduled family meeting. Sarah stood on the porch, reading and rereading the official notice, her hands trembling. State Department of Transportation, she told David over the phone. They're conducting a preliminary assessment for a potential highway expansion. Our property is in the study area for possible eminent domain acquisition. Timing seems suspicious, David replied. Right when we discover historical significance that could block commercial development. Uncle Robert's fingerprints are all over this, Sarah agreed. He serves on the Regional Transportation Committee. The notice explained that properties with historical or environmental significance would require special evaluation before any acquisition decisions. Sarah had 10 days to submit documentation of any such claim. She gathered her growing team that evening. David, Hank, Martha from the Historical Society, and Michael, who'd become increasingly supportive. They spread documents across the farmhouse dining table. Thomas Bennett's journal, Eleanor's records, soil analyses, and the Underground Railroad documentation. We need to move quickly, Martha advised. The State Historical Preservation Office requires substantial evidence for emergency designation. What about the State Environmental Protection Agency? David suggested. The unique soil composition and water system could qualify for natural resource protection. We should pursue both, Sarah decided, and we need to document everything about the southeastern field, the heart of the land. It's clearly the most significant section. Michael examined the Transportation Department notice. This potential route would cut right through that field. Coincidence? I think not. The next morning, a convoy of trucks rumbled up the driveway, the County Historical Society's documentation team, accompanied by a state preservation officer. Martha had convinced to make an emergency site visit. They photographed the barn's hidden symbols, recorded detailed measurements of the concealed chamber, and collected soil samples from the special field. Sarah provided copies of all documents, emphasizing the continuous agricultural practices stemming from African tradition. In my 20 years with the Preservation Office, I've rarely seen such well-documented historical significance, the state officer admitted. The combination of Underground Railroad history and preserved agricultural techniques from African traditions makes this site uniquely important. As the team worked, a sleek black car pulled up. Richard Harrison stepped out, accompanied by a woman in a sharp business suit. Miss Bennett, Harrison called. I'd like to introduce Vanessa Mercer, Counsel for Evergreen Developments. We noticed quite a bit of activity and wanted to check in. Just documenting the historical significance of my property, Sarah replied coolly. Historical claims require rigorous verification, Mercer noted, and they don't necessarily prevent infrastructure projects deemed in the public interest. We're aware of the Transportation Department notice, Harrison added. Such a shame. A highway would destroy the property's character entirely. Unless, of course, you sold to us before any eminent domain proceedings, Mercer suggested. Our offer still stands, better than any government compensation package. After they left, Sarah's phone rang. Uncle Robert, you're making a mistake, he said without preamble. These historical preservation claims won't hold up. The highway project has strong political backing. Is that why you pushed for it? To force my hand when the historical significance blocked your development plans. A pause. I'm trying to secure our family's financial future, Sarah. This land is worth millions, but only if we act before the government steps in. This isn't just about money anymore, Uncle Robert. This farm has historical and scientific significance that deserves protection. Don't be naive, he snapped. Those developers aren't interested in building houses. They want what's in the soil, exclusive agricultural rights to those special properties. The mineral composition makes crops grown there more nutritionally dense than anything on the market, worth billions in the nutraceutical industry. You've known all along, Sarah realized. That's why you've been so insistent. Eleanor refused to see the potential. She was stuck in the past, giving away miracle vegetables at the farmer's market when she could have built a health foods empire. His voice hardened. I tried to convince her for years. Now the choice is yours. Sell to the developers and share the profits with family, or lose everything to eminent domain. That evening, Sarah walked the southeastern field alone, trying to process everything. The farm hummed with summer life, crickets chirping, fireflies emerging, crops ripening in the rich soil. In just 6 months, she had transformed overgrown land into productive fields, uncovered historical secrets, and connected with a community that valued what Eleanor had protected. Now it could all be lost, either to developers who would exploit the land's special properties for profit, or to a highway that would bury its heart under concrete. Sarah's phone chimed with a message from David. Just spoke with the soil scientist. Test results confirm extraordinarily high nutrient profiles in crops from the special field. Unlike anything they've documented elsewhere, this could be our strongest argument for preservation, a unique natural resource. As she read his message, Sarah noticed movement at the property edge. Harrison's black car parked on the access road, someone with surveying equipment taking measurements along the proposed highway route. They weren't waiting for legal proceedings. They were already planning the destruction of everything Eleanor had protected. The family meeting was tomorrow. Sarah needed to make her case not just for history or sentiment, but for the future, what this land could mean for sustainable agriculture, for preserving knowledge almost lost, for continuing Eleanor's vision of a farm that nourished both body and community. But with powerful interests aligned against her, would anyone listen? Dawn found Sarah in Eleanor's study, surrounded by documents, preparing for the family meeting. Her case needed to be airtight. Historical significance, agricultural uniqueness, and financial viability all clearly demonstrated, with both developers and the transportation department circling. This might be her last chance to save the farm. A knock at the door interrupted her preparation. Hank stood on the porch, holding a small digital recorder. Found this cleaning out my shed, he explained. Eleanor left it with me last spring. Said if anything happened to her, I should give it to whoever was fighting for the farm. Sarah pressed play. Eleanor's voice, thin but determined, filled the room. To whoever carries on my work, likely Sarah, if I know my granddaughter's heart. If you're listening, you've discovered what makes our land special. The southeastern field, the heart isn't just fertile soil. It's living history, knowledge, preserved when so much was lost. Robert never understood. He sees dollar signs, not legacy. The developers who've approached me don't want to build houses. They want the soil composition. Their agricultural division has been analyzing our produce for years. They know what we have. I've documented everything in journals hidden where only someone who loves this land would look. The spring house foundation, beneath the stone with the crescent moon carving. You'll find proof of what they've been doing and why this land must remain a working farm, not a corporate laboratory. Remember, the heart of the land isn't just a place, it's a promise to honor the knowledge passed down, to grow food that truly nourishes, to protect what was entrusted to our family generations ago. Trust yourself, Sarah. You have my stubborn spirit and your grandfather's gentle hands. The land responds to both. Sarah and David found the spring house ruins as the morning mist still clung to the fields. The crescent moon stone was weathered, but distinct. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed in plastic, lay Eleanor's final journal and a USB drive. The journal detailed Eleanor's interactions with the agricultural division of what was now Evergreen's parent company. They had approached her repeatedly, offering partnerships that would give them exclusive rights to study and patent elements of the soil microbiome. They don't want to preserve, they want to extract, isolate, and control, Eleanor had written. What makes this land special is the interconnected system, the water, the soil, the farming techniques passed down for generations. You can't reduce it to a formula. The USB drive contained correspondence, legal opinions, and scientific analyses Eleanor had commissioned. Most significantly, it held video recordings of company representatives making increasingly aggressive offers, culminating in thinly veiled threats about eminent domain proceedings if she wouldn't sell. They said the highway proposal has been in their back pocket for years. Sarah realized Uncle Robert must have finally convinced them to use it. With 2 hours until the family meeting, Sarah worked feverishly with David to organize this new evidence. They were interrupted by Michael's arrival, his expression grave. "Just got a call from Aunt Patricia," he reported. Uncle Robert's arranged for Evergreen's lawyers to attend the family meeting. They're bringing an emergency injunction to prevent any historical designation pending review of their development rights. Sarah felt the walls closing in. "They're getting desperate." "That's good news," David insisted. "It means they're worried. The historical and environmental evidence must be stronger than they expected." Sarah's phone buzzed with messages from the Friends of Eleanor's farm group. State Preservation Office expediting review. Environmental Impact Assessment Team coming tomorrow. Local news running story tonight on Underground Railroad connection. The community was rallying, but would it be enough against corporate lawyers and the threat of government seizure? As Sarah prepared to leave for the meeting, a final message came from Martha at the Historical Society, University Agricultural Department reviewing Eleanor's weather data and seed collection, calling it groundbreaking climate adaptation research. Stay strong. The drive into town felt like heading into battle. Sarah's truck was loaded with evidence, samples and documentation, her arsenal against Uncle Robert's legal maneuvers and the developer's resources. At Michael's suggestion, they stopped at the cemetery. Standing before Eleanor's grave, Sarah felt both the weight of responsibility and the strength of connection. "I understand now," she whispered, "why you fought so hard, why you kept so many secrets." Michael placed a hand on her shoulder. "You know she'd be proud of you. Whatever happens today, the family would be gathering at the community center, neutral ground for what promised to be a contentious meeting." As they pulled into the parking lot, Sarah was surprised to see dozens of cars already there. "What's going on?" she wondered aloud. Inside, the meeting room was filled not just with Bennett family members, but with farmers, historians, community advocates, and local officials. A banner hung across one wall, "Save Eleanor's Legacy." The Friends of Eleanor's farm had mobilized the entire community. Uncle Robert stood near the podium, flanked by Harrison and lawyers from Evergreen. His face darkened when he saw the crowd. "This is a private family matter," he objected, as Sarah entered. "Not anymore," Sarah replied, setting Eleanor's recorder on the table. "Grandma has something everyone needs to hear." The community center hummed with tension as family members and townspeople settled into chairs. At the front, a large table had been arranged with Eleanor's farmhouse kitchen table at its center, brought in by volunteers as a symbol of her presence. Around this family table sat the key players, Sarah and Michael on one side, Uncle Robert and Harrison from Evergreen on the other. "Before we begin," said Janet Whitfield, the town council president who'd agreed to moderate, "let's establish that while this began as a family matter, it now involves community heritage, environmental concerns, and potential eminent domain proceedings. Everyone deserves to be heard." Uncle Robert leaned forward. "This is quite simple. My sister left the farm to Sarah, but its value to the entire family. We have a legitimate offer that benefits everyone, and a highway threat that could leave us with nothing." "That highway proposal," Sarah interjected, "which you helped initiate through your position on the Transportation Committee." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Robert's face reddened. "I advocated for necessary infrastructure. The route selection was independent." Sarah placed Eleanor's digital recorder on the table. "Let's hear what Grandma has to say about that." As Eleanor's voice filled the room, explaining the developer's true interest in the soil properties and their years of pressure tactics, Robert's expression shifted from indignation to discomfort. Harrison maintained his professional composure, but his eyes darted nervously to his legal team. When the recording ended, Sarah distributed folders containing Eleanor's documentation company emails discussing the unique agricultural asset, soil analyses showing extraordinary properties, and the record of increasingly aggressive acquisition attempts. Grandma wasn't just being stubborn, Sarah explained. She was protecting something truly special, not just from developers, but for future generations. Martha from the Historical Society stepped forward with Thomas Bennett's journal and photographs of the Underground Railroad evidence. Abrams from the Agricultural Extension Office presented the scientific findings about the farm's unique growing conditions. This combination of historical significance and agricultural uniqueness makes Bennett Farm eligible for both state historical preservation status and environmental conservation protection, Martha explained, which would restrict development indefinitely. Harrison interjected, depriving the family of fair market value. Fair market value, Sarah repeated. Let's talk about what this land is really worth. She motioned to David, who distributed the business plan they'd developed. Bennett Heritage Farm can generate sustainable income through multiple revenue streams: premium produce sales, heritage seed preservation, educational programs, and research partnerships. Aunt Patricia studied the projections. These numbers seem optimistic. They're conservative, David replied. Based on just 6 months of actual production and our current market response, the specialty restaurant contracts alone could generate significant income. Sarah placed a basket of produce on the table: tomatoes, herbs, and vegetables harvested that morning from the southeastern field. This isn't just food. These plants, grown in our unique soil, have nutritional properties documented to be 2 to 3 times higher than commercial equivalents. That's what Evergreen really wants, not to build houses, but to control the soil composition for their agricultural biotech division. Harrison shifted uncomfortably as Sarah distributed lab reports confirming her claims. Our offer benefits everyone, he insisted. Your family receives fair compensation, and our company develops agricultural innovations that could help people worldwide. By patenting and controlling techniques and properties that have been freely shared for generations, Sarah countered. Eleanor understood what you intended. She played another recording, a meeting between Eleanor and Harrison's predecessor from 3 years earlier, discussing proprietary rights to the soil microbiome and exclusive licensing of farming techniques. Robert finally spoke. Even if everything you're saying is true, Sarah, the highway threat is real. The eminent domain notice wasn't a bluff. Actually, said a woman standing up from the back, that may not be accurate. She introduced herself as a representative from the State Historic Preservation Office. Based on emergency documentation submitted this week, we've initiated expedited review for protected status. This automatically triggers a halt to any transportation planning until review is complete. For the first time, Harrison looked genuinely concerned, consulting hurriedly with his legal team. There's another option, Sarah said, returning to the family business plan, one that honors Eleanor's wishes while providing for everyone's needs. She outlined a proposal for Bennett Heritage Farm Trust, a legal structure that would preserve the farm's agricultural use while providing income shares to family members. The southeastern field, the heart of the land, would remain intact as a working farm and research site, she explained. The rest could support sustainable agriculture, educational programs, and even limited eco-friendly development that doesn't disturb the critical areas. As family members studied the proposal, Uncle Robert suddenly stood. This is emotional manipulation. Sarah's using Eleanor's memory to deny us fair compensation. He turned to the family. She collapsed from exhaustion just weeks ago. She can't possibly manage this property alone. The trust idea is a fantasy. She's not alone, David said firmly, standing alongside Sarah. Dozens of community members rose with him. Friends of Eleanor's Farm has over 200 active volunteers now. The university has offered research partnerships. 3 organic restaurant chains want exclusive contracts. Uncle Robert, looked around the room, suddenly realizing how isolated his position had become. Even Harrison was now deep in conversation with his legal team, apparently reassessing their strategy. "The family meeting will recess for 30 minutes, announced Janet Whitfield. "I suggest everyone review these materials carefully before we reconvene for a decision." As people dispersed into small discussion groups, Sarah remained at Eleanor's table, her hand resting on its worn surface. She felt a strange sense of her grandmother's presence, not as a ghost, but as a continuation. The work Eleanor had protected was now hers to carry forward. The farm's heart was still beating, and it was stronger than ever. When the meeting reconvened, the energy had shifted. Family members clustered together, speaking in hushed tones. Harrison from Evergreen Developments sat with his legal team, their expressions serious as they reviewed documents. Janet Whitfield called the room to order. "Before we continue, Mr. Harrison has requested time to address the group." Harrison approached the central table, his corporate polish somewhat diminished. "After reviewing the historical documentation and speaking with our agricultural division, Evergreen would like to propose an alternative arrangement." He glanced at his legal team before continuing. "We recognize the unique properties of Bennett Farm and its historical significance. Instead of residential development, we propose a research partnership that would preserve the property while studying its agricultural potential." "A partnership that gives you control and ownership," Sarah clarified. "Shared benefits," Harrison countered, "with substantial compensation to the Bennett family." Uncle Robert seemed energized by this shift. "This could be the compromise we need. The family gets financial benefit, the land stays agricultural, and Sarah can maintain involvement." "What about the historical aspects?" Martha asked. "The Underground Railroad site, the traditional growing techniques." "Academic access could be arranged," Harrison offered, "within reasonable proprietary limits." Sarah studied the faces of her family members. Some appeared tempted, weighing immediate financial security against abstract preservation. "Before anyone decides," she said, "there's something you should see." Outside, Transportation Department vehicles lined the farm's entrance road, not for construction but for the environmental assessment team that had arrived that morning. Beyond them, dozens of community members were working in the fields, harvesting, weeding, building. School buses arrived carrying students for the educational program that had begun the previous week. A film crew from the State Historical Society documented the Underground Railroad site. University researchers collected soil samples from test plots. "This isn't just about our family anymore," Sarah explained as they watched. "The farm has become part of something larger." She guided them toward the southeastern field, the heart of the land, now lush with crops grown using Eleanor's methods. Tables had been set up at the field's edge, laden with food prepared from the morning's harvest. "I'd like you all to try something," Sarah said, offering plates of simply prepared vegetables, herbs, and fruits. These were grown in the special soil, using the methods passed down through generations. The family members tasted cautiously, then with increasing appreciation. "The flavor is extraordinary," Aunt Patricia admitted. "So vibrant." "It's not just flavor," David explained, distributing the nutritional analysis. "These foods have measurably higher nutritional density. The specific mineral composition of the soil, combined with these growing techniques, creates something unique." Uncle Robert sampled a tomato, his expression shifting from skepticism to surprise. "This is what Eleanor was protecting." "Part of it," Sarah nodded. "The knowledge, the land, the community connection. It's all interconnected." As they toured the farm, family members witnessed the transformation from abandoned fields to vibrant agricultural and cultural center. The old barn now housed educational displays about agricultural history and the Underground Railroad. The commercial kitchen processed value-added product. Local artisans sold goods at a small farm store. At the well in the southeastern field, Sarah gathered everyone. "This is the literal and figurative heart of the land, the source that feeds everything." Eleanor protected it, her entire life, not just for our family, but for everyone who benefits from what grows here. Uncle Robert had been uncharacteristically quiet during the tour. Now he studied the well's carved stones, the lush crops surrounding it, the community members working nearby. "Eleanor tried to explain this to me for years," he said finally. "I only saw dollar signs, not this." He gestured to the flourishing landscape. "I thought she was being stubborn, clinging to the past. She was protecting the future," Sarah replied gently. Robert turned to Harrison. "The family needs to discuss privately before making any decisions." In the farmhouse kitchen, the Bennett family gathered around Eleanor's table, now returned to its rightful place. The discussion was lengthy, occasionally heated, but increasingly unified. When they finally emerged, Robert approached Sarah. "We've reached a decision," he announced. "The family supports your proposal for the Bennett Heritage Farm Trust, with some modifications to the financial structure." He handed her the document with their notes. No development, no corporate partnerships that would compromise Eleanor's vision. 6 months later, Sarah stood beside the newly installed sign at the farm entrance. Eleanor's Legacy Heritage Farm and Education Center. The restored barn gleamed with fresh paint. The farmhouse's once sagging porch now welcomed visitors to farm-to-table dinners. Fields that had been overgrown now produced abundant crops. The southeastern field, the heart, remained dedicated to Eleanor's special growing methods, producing food for both market and research. University partnerships studied its unique properties while respecting traditional knowledge. The Underground Railroad site had been carefully preserved, with educational programs honoring both the freedom seekers and the African agricultural traditions they had shared. David joined Sarah at the sign, their hands naturally finding each other's. Behind them, visitors and community members moved throughout the property, a living tribute to Eleanor's vision. "She would have loved this," Sarah said, watching children learn about seed saving in the garden Eleanor had once tended. "She saw it coming," David replied. "That's why she left it to you." Sarah nodded, feeling the deep connection to both the land and her grandmother. The heart of the land was beating strongly now, nourishing not just crops, but community, knowledge and hope, just as it had for generations before, and would for generations to come.